Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Panic Attack Coaching channel with me, Tom, your Panic Attack coach. In this video, we're going to be talking about why panic attacks continue. Why after that first panic attack is another panic attack so likely? Why do they get more regular? And why do they so quickly become such a big problem in our lives? So what I would recommend, if you haven't already, is please do watch the previous videos, because this builds upon the learning that we did in the previous ones. For a quick recap though, let's just think about quickly what we talked about before, the fear response and panic attacks. Let's go through that panic cycle again. So we talked about how a trigger, which could be anything, leads to a feeling of fear. That feeling of fear is the fear response, and adrenaline is released. It goes all around our body and it gives rise to very predictable effects like our heart going faster, breathing quicker, sweating, feeling more alert, a bit dizzy, pins and needles. All of these kind of things are part of the fear response. So these sensations, and please note that I say sensations, I don't call them symptoms, because symptoms suggest there's something wrong. Just like I don't think of laughter as a symptom of happiness, I don't see sensations in fear as symptoms of fear, because they're normal. And what we want to do is to normalize our experience as much as we can. This isn't a medical problem. So these are sensations. So when we get these sensations, in a panic attack, what happens is we become afraid of how we're feeling. So I often use the example of the heart because that's a common one. We feel our heart going faster and we misinterpret that as a sign that something bad is happening to our heart. As soon as we feel afraid that something bad is happening to our heart, it escalates the fear response. It triggers that again. We then get release of more adrenaline. We're also focusing more on our heart, so we're noticing the sensation more. And this whole thing just escalates with catastrophic thoughts. I'm going to die, I'm going to collapse, my heart's going to fail, and we get into this real panic. And we talked about how it's always a relatively short period of time. Panic attacks always end, they cannot last. And once the panic attack subsides, we're left feeling absolutely exhausted, physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted. I remember when I had my first panic attack. For me, it happened in an exam, which was great. It was one of my final exams of my first degree, and I was preparing to start writing, and I felt weird. I was feeling sweaty. I can remember I couldn't hold my pen because my fingers were so wet with sweat. I was feeling dizzy. My heart was beating fast. I felt clammy. I felt sick, and I had that feeling like, oh no, something terrible is happening to me. And because I was so worried about my exam, my first thought was, I'm going to fail. And I also had the thought I might die, but I was so worried about my exam that was almost just as bad. I started the exam, I wrote a little bit in like the horizontal position, and eventually I just couldn't bear it anymore, and I ran out of the room, ran outside, like collapsed on the ground and felt absolutely terrible. Obviously relieved that I had escaped, and started feeling better. But I remember clearly crying all the way home and feeling absolutely awful, annoyed with myself for messing up my future and failing the exam, and weak for letting this happen to me, and confused because I didn't know why, and scared because what the hell was going on in my body. Um, and it's this trauma that is so important to understand, because it's often we can trivialize something that happens to us and be like, oh, it's just a panic attack and I've read all about it and it was just this. But in that moment, they are genuinely traumatic experiences, because as much as we can, in retrospect, look back and say, it was fine, in that moment, our minds think we're in absolute peril, and that is the same as any traumatic experience. So after our first panic attack, we've suffered a trauma, and the way that trauma works is trauma makes us more sensitive and hyper alert to reminders of that event that we were traumatized by. So this will depend a little bit on your experience of your first panic attack, but let's continue with the example of like the heart, because it's such a classic fear. So let's say in your first panic attack you were terrified of your heart racing, and you thought you were going to have a heart attack, you thought you were going to die. You got through that panic attack, but you're left thinking, is there something wrong with my heart? Like, I might have got rid of that, I might have survived that panic attack, but if it happens again, there's a good chance that's going to be the end of me. So you start being very aware of your heart. Like, you never really thought about it before, but now you're thinking, ooh, I thought I noticed a beat go a bit wrong then, or I skipped a beat. Or is it going a bit fast? Is it going too slow? Am I feeling a bit of discomfort? And you really start noticing everything in your chest. And because you're on edge and you're terrified of the same thing happening again, you're even more likely to misinterpret quite normal sensations. Because after all, all of our bodies have weird sensations in our stomach, chest, head. It's normal, it's part of the human experience. But after a panic attack, nothing feels normal again. So one of the reasons you're more likely to have another panic attack is because you're so sensitive of the sensations. So let's say like a couple of days later, you're kind of, I don't know, on the bus and you're feeling okay, and you just get that kind of, ooh, my heart skipped a beat feeling. Then suddenly that fear is going to hit you. That fear response will be triggered because you will suddenly think, oh God, that's that heart that I'm worried about, like what's happening? And then quickly you're spiraling back into a panic attack. Remember, I said that triggers can be anything, including sensations. Well, this is exactly the kind of thing. Sensations in our body after an initial panic attack lead to further panic attacks. And really, subsequent panic attacks are the fear of fear. It's that fear that you will become afraid, which will then lead to this awful experience that you're then afraid of. So it's like fear of fear of fear. It's this overwhelming anxiety around fear and having that sense that you're not in control of how you're feeling physically or mentally. It's really terrifying. So we talked about how you can become hyper aware and alert of the sensations in your body. One thing you can also do, continuing the heart example, is you can begin kind of checking that everything's okay. Like, you might be feeling all right, but you think, oh, your memories are, you're thinking that traumatic experience the other week, you're thinking about your heart, and you're like, I wonder if like everything's okay. Check your neck, your pulse there, feel your wrist. Feels a bit fast. Oh, it's getting faster when I do that. Oh, that doesn't feel right. Oh, my fear responses hit again. Bang, I'm in a panic attack. Or it feels okay, but I'm just going to keep checking anyway. Oh, it skipped a beat. Bang, fear response, panic attack. So in a way, what we're doing, we're checking that everything's okay, but it's making us more alert and aware of the thing we're scared of, and then it's making us more susceptible for feeling something that might be wrong. In fact, nothing's wrong. Your heart naturally has a bit of odd beat sometimes, but we feel that something's wrong. And these kind of checking things can be done on all kinds of sensations, like your breathing. Oh, let me just check I can take a deep breath. Oh, that didn't feel quite right. Oh, I can't quite feel I can get enough air in. Oh, maybe my lungs aren't working. Bang, it's the reminder, it's the trigger. You're starting a panic attack again. So this is how easy it is to start getting regular panic attacks. And even if the first one wasn't even triggered by a fear of your body or a sensation, it might have just been you're generally feeling a bit anxious, you hadn't slept, something happened, and it came out of the blue. First ones often come completely out of the blue, but subsequently they're often linked to a trigger, and that trigger is often linked to the trauma of the first. So they're quite self-sustaining, and these checking behaviours are classic, and we'll be talking about these much more in subsequent videos, but you might start understanding why a key part of recovery is to stop checking. which can be really difficult. So alongside checking is avoidance. Avoidance is a really difficult one because it's very understandable that after we have trauma and when we have repeated trauma, we do everything we can to stop it happening again. You would be crazy if you didn't do that. And when an experience like panic attacks happen, like that's the natural thing to do. The problem with avoidance is we end up doing things with good intentions which actually make our panic attacks worse. So let's say your first panic attack happened when you're on the train and you remember every time you go near a train station, that's where I had a panic attack. So you think, to avoid having that again, I'm just not going to go on the train. Right, I'll do everything else, I'm just not going on the train. While that might help you not have another panic attack on the train, what it tends to do is it tells your subconscious, I won't cope if I'm on the train, and I'm only safe if I'm not on the train. This reinforces the idea that being on the train will make you panic, which makes going on the train even harder and almost impossible. And you can replicate this in so many different areas. Like, I don't want to go back into my class because if I do, I might feel like this again. I'm going to not go to school or go to university or whatever because that will avoid it happening. You avoid it happening, and then it reinforces your mind. If I go there, I will not be safe. I will not cope. I will get a panic attack. So what happens is over time, you begin avoiding more and more things to help protect you from having further panic attacks. And this makes your whole kind of life shrink towards you because you stop doing more and more, like you do less and less things because you're worried that something might trigger it. So you try and avoid anything that might trigger your panic attack. Now, this is specific to your specific experience of panic, but ultimately it just results in your kind of world shrinking around you. And this is why I often describe experiencing panic attacks like being in a prison, because the prison walls are your fear and they close in on you until you're a prisoner in your own mind because you don't feel able to do anything you want in your life. And a condition that's really all about this is agoraphobia. Now, agoraphobia is basically avoiding places that might trigger a panic attack or that you feel might lead to a panic attack. And they're places where if you were to have a panic attack, you would believe something very bad would happen to you. So let's say you are afraid of going on an aeroplane because you're scared that if you had a panic attack there, you wouldn't be able to get out. You would be embarrassed because you would be surrounded by people and you wouldn't be able to get help quickly because you're in the air. So agoraphobia often leads to avoidance of places where you feel potentially trapped. Public places, buses, trains, cinemas, theatres. And you can see how this really affects your life. You don't go to the bars, you don't do anything with your friends, and very soon you can end up being housebound. And some of you might be experiencing that now, and I was very close to that myself. Sometimes I just really wanted to stay inside because it was my safe space. The problem is, with everything you avoid, it's just reinforcing this idea that if I did go out, I wouldn't be able to cope. And that feeds that fear, which sustains the panic, because you're not gaining any experiences to tell yourself, I'm okay. You say, I'm only okay because I'm not doing that, which basically makes you feel helpless. And it's really difficult because in the short term and medium term, it can reduce the frequency of your panic attacks, but it creates a prison within which you live. and it's awful because it's a terrible existence in itself, and then the thought of changing it is equally as terrifying. So that's just a little bit about how avoidance can be problematic, and that's also a touch on agoraphobia, which is something I've experienced and something that many people with panic attacks also experience. Another thing that happens after an initial panic attack is we do things to counteract a possible panic attack or protect us from another one happening. So we talk about avoidance, but this is doing like other things rather than avoid. This is doing stuff to help us cope in the situation. So, for example, when I feel nervous, I'm more likely to have a panic attack. Let's do things to stop myself feeling nervous. This could mean I'm going to have 2 or 3 beers before I go to this place. In the short term, that might make you feel a little bit better and you may not have a panic attack. However, guess what? Your brain thinks the only reason I didn't have a panic attack was because I had alcohol. I would not cope if I didn't have alcohol. I should drink alcohol whenever I need to do X, Y, or Z. So your strategies for allowing yourself to do things become your crutches, and you become reliant on them, and they weaken you because they convince you that you won't be okay without them. And it's so hard because it's so understandable. Like, I drank too much alcohol. I was at university. I had some important lectures and I wanted to go there. I had a couple of beers before I went. I went to the pub on the way and it allowed me to be there. And it's a completely natural thing to do and it's nothing to be ashamed of, but it's keeping us trapped. And there's lots of other things we can do, like we might only go places with someone. That person becomes our crutch, and we only believe we coped because they were there, and if they weren't there, we would not cope. And all of these things all fuel this underlying fear of fear, and they either do it directly or indirectly. Now, another thing to talk about here is medication. Now, although I am a doctor, I'm not your doctor, and this isn't medical advice, but I just want to give you some words of caution about certain medications. There are a lot of fantastic medications that help with anxiety and panic attacks, and I'm not against using medications. I've taken medications myself, and I think they're very valuable, especially SSRIs like citalopram and that kind of thing. However, there are some medications which are used to help with I'm going to have to say symptoms here because that's what they're described medically, the symptoms of panic. They offer symptomatic relief. So I'm going to talk about 2 classic ones here. First is a class of drugs called beta blockers. You might have heard of propranolol. Now, propranolol doesn't treat fear and doesn't change how we think at all. It slows down our heart. So for people whose panic occurs due to catastrophic thinking around their heart, they feel that this helps them because it slows their heart rate down, which makes them feel less afraid. Now, I'm not denying that is not potentially helpful for some people, but if we think about it like alcohol, what we're saying to ourselves is, if I don't take propranolol, I will not be able to cope. Propranolol is what keeps me going and allows me to be okay. So in some ways, we're not getting any closer to overcoming panic. We're just relying on something else. And this isn't me saying stop it if you're taking it. You need to carefully discuss that with your doctor. But I would just be cautious about some of the treatments. I say treatments, some of the medications that are used in panic. Now, the other one, which I know is much more popular in the US than it is in the UK, is a class of drugs called benzodiazepines. Now, I'm quite against benzodiazepines, not in themselves. They have some very valuable uses, and I've prescribed them myself as a doctor. But they are symptomatic relief as well. They reduce the feeling of fear because they're sedatives. It's very easy to become reliant on sedatives. You will start thinking quite quickly, the only reason I didn't have a panic attack was because I took my diazepam, my lorazepam. And while you might feel better short term, you feel like the only reason I'm not having panic attacks isn't because I'm taking this. And the thing with benzodiazepines is you often need increasing doses over time as you become more used to them. So you develop a psychological dependency on them and also a bit of a physical dependency on them. And I would be cautious about taking them, because remember what I said in the first video, I'm here to beat panic with you. We want to get rid of all panic. We're not here to cope. We're not here to limit. We're here to completely overcome. And the medications I just described, although have value, they can lead to us getting further away from overcoming, even if they slightly reduce or help us face our life. So hopefully that makes sense. It's very important that you don't suddenly stop benzodiazepines if you are taking them. So do wean off gradually with the help of your doctor. So before you cut down or stop any medications to do your mental health, do consult your doctor. So what we talked about in this session then is why panic attacks can continue to be a problem. We've talked about how the trauma from the first episode can really make us hyper alert and fearful of subsequent ones, which lowers our threshold and adds triggers which make a panic attack more likely. We then talked about how checking yourself physically can reinforce this idea that you're not okay and can make you more susceptible to experiencing sensations that might make you have a trigger for a panic attack. We also talked about how avoidance can lead to this trapping of us. We avoid going places, we avoid things that we think might trigger us, and soon our life shrinks around us, and it reinforces the idea that we can't cope unless we do these things. This pushes us further away from recovery, even if we're having less panic attacks, because we're caught in this awful truce between I can't cope and I have to do X to cope, and if I do this I won't cope, and it's hell. You're trapped. You feel like you want to get better but you can't, and you're just stuck in this awful limbo. And similarly, these counteracting methods to do what we need to do in life, i.e. I still got to go to university, I've still got to work, I've still got to look after my children, I've still got to do all this. How can I do that despite how I'm feeling? I'm going to use things and tools to get by. And often we pick things that, although offer some short-term relief, perpetuate the problem. Dependencies on alcohol, certain drugs potentially, people. There's all sorts of things that you could put in this category. And I think the most important thing for now is just to become aware of what things you can identify that, however good meaning, seems to be perpetuating this problem for you. And they're subtle. Some of them are obvious, but some of them are subtle. And don't let your mind trick you, because sometimes you'll think, oh yeah, that's quite a good thing, like there's no problem with this. Ask yourself honestly, like, is this healthy? Is this getting me closer to overcoming panic, or is this reinforcing a belief that I need it or I can't do something without it? So again, just to repeat, talk to your doctor, talk to your therapist. Don't make any rash decisions based on this video, but hopefully it will give you a bit more skepticism about some of the things you're doing in your life, because ultimately, as I said, I'm not here to help you cope. I'm here to help you thrive, and the only way we can thrive is to fully recover. So I'm not cutting any corners here. We're going straight for the root of the problem. So this kind of completes, I guess, this first few videos where we've talked about fear, panic, and what sustains it. Now, the next video, I'm going to introduce the truths of panic a bit more holistically. So we've already mentioned one, previously, but I'm going to talk you through what I call my 3 truths of panic. And it builds on all the videos we've done so far, all the information we know about panic, and it lays out the framework, the logical reasons why you no longer have to have panic attacks. And this knowledge and this understanding of like why panic attacks happen and what they mean will allow us to introduce techniques and new ways of thinking which will help us move from that position of knowing to believing. And remember, when we get to the point of believing, panic attacks cannot exist. You cannot have a panic attack if you're not afraid. So we're getting to the point where we're not going to be afraid, and we're completely in the right direction, and we're on the right path. So thank you very much for listening to this. I hope it's been valuable. If you enjoyed it, please give me a like. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Please share this video with people you think it would be of value to. And I will join you next time where we'll be talking about the truths. And just to also mention, I do provide panic coaching. I would love to talk to you individually. I'm very happy to meet you for free, to get to know each other, to see if you would find my help useful. You can reach me through my website at panic-coaching.com. You can email me at panic.coaching@gmail.com. Any other comments or questions, please leave them underneath the video and I will reply to all of them. Take care, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you.